and threat against nuclear facilities devoted to peaceful purposes is a violation of the principles of the Charter, international law, and the statute of the agency. Madam President, dear colleagues, as Director General of the IAEA and consistent with the objectives of the IAEA and our statute, I call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint to avoid further escalation. I reiterate that any military action that jeopardizes safety and security of nuclear facilities risk grave consequences for the people of Iran, the region, and beyond. You were evoking, or Madam Undersecretary General was evoking, that yesterday the Board of Governors of the IAEA adopted an important resolution on Iran's safeguards obligations. But in addition to this, the board resolution stressed its support for a diplomatic solution to the problems posed by the Iranian nuclear program. The IAEA continues to monitor the situation closely. Our Incident and Emergency Center has maintained continuous contact with the Iranian authorities from the onset of the attack, regularly confirming the status of the facilities, and will continue to do so in the coming days. Additionally, we have established a task force comprising several senior staff members to monitor the situation closely over the next few days, and they will be available 24/7, of course, at the disposal of the United Nations Security Council, as it should be. The IAEA stands ready to provide technical assistance and remains committed to its nuclear safety, security, and safeguards mandate in all circumstances. I stand ready to engage with all relevant parties to help ensure the protection of nuclear facilities and the continued peaceful use of nuclear technology in accordance with our mandate, including deploying agency nuclear security and safety experts, in addition to our safeguards inspectors already present in Iran, wherever necessary, to ensure that nuclear installations are fully protected and continue to be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. As I informed today the IAEA Board of Governors, Madam President, I have indicated to the respective authorities my readiness to travel at the earliest to assess the situation and ensure safety, security, and non-proliferation in Iran. I have also been in contact with our inspectors in Iran and Israel. The safety of our staff is, of course, of paramount importance. All necessary actions are being taken to ensure they are not harmed. Despite the current military actions and heightened tensions, it is clear that the only sustainable path forward for Iran, for Israel, the entire region, and the international community is one grounded in dialogue and diplomacy to ensure peace, stability, and cooperation. The IAEA, as the international technical institution entrusted with overseeing the peaceful use of nuclear energy, remains a unique and vital forum for dialogue, especially now. In accordance with its statute and long-standing mandate, the IAEA provides the framework and natural platform where facts prevail over rhetoric and where engagement can replace escalation. I reaffirm my personal and the agency's readiness to facilitate technical discussions and support efforts that promote transparency, safety, security, and the peaceful resolution of nuclear-related issues in Iran. I thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Grossi for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, we would like to thank the Undersecretary General for Political Affairs, Political and Peace-Building Affairs. We thank Mr. Carlo and the Director General of the IAEA, Ms. Grossi. We thank them for their briefings. First of all, we would like to express our condolences to the leadership and the people of the Islamic Republic of Iran, having to do with the numerous victims, including amongst civilians, which were the result of Israeli action. In front of our eyes, because of Israeli action, what is happening is a very dangerous escalation in the Middle East region, and this is something that requires an immediate attention from this Council. We are grateful to the Guyana Presidency for convening this meeting of ours so expeditiously. It's symptomatic that initially the Council was to consider today, at this very time, the humanitarian consequences of inhumane actions by Israel against the people in the Gaza Strip. Instead of that, we are here having to discuss a new, most dangerous and irresponsible adventure by West Jerusalem in the region, but this time it is also pushing the region to a large-scale nuclear catastrophe. In the early hours of the 13th of June, Israel delivered a number of extensive strikes against the territory of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Peaceful sleeping cities were struck, civilian infrastructure, and peaceful nuclear installations under IAEA safeguards. We heard from the briefers today that there have been victims amongst civilians. This completely unprovoked attack, no matter what Israel says to the contrary, is a gross violation of the UN Charter and international law. One is left with the impression that the leadership of Israel is convinced that they have a completely free hand in the region, and they probably think that Israel can flout any legal norms and replace all international bodies, including the Security Council and IAEA. The Russian Federation strongly condemns this action by West Jerusalem. West Jerusalem's military adventure pushes the region to the brink of a large-scale war, and the responsibility for all of the consequences of these actions lies fully with the Israeli leadership and those who encourage them. We are particularly concerned by the potential radiological consequences of hitting nuclear installations. My country has for a number of years been warning and saying that trying to resolve by force the issues surrounding the Iran nuclear program are unacceptable, as they can lead to the most dire consequences, not just the Middle East region, but for the world as a whole. But these calls of ours were not heeded, and the situation is now following the most negative and unpredictable scenario. Madam President, Israeli actions are aimed at undermining the various negotiating efforts underway now, the efforts to lower the tensions surrounding Iran's peaceful nuclear program. The whole world is looking with hope for the outcome of yet another round of indirect contacts between Iran and the United States, and they were planned for the 15th of June. Israel decided to preempt this in the way they deemed necessary and started bombing the nuclear and energy infrastructure in Iran, showing this way their contempt for laws, norms, agreements, rules, everything that is the basis for a civilized interaction between states. The responsibility for what happened is not just with the state of Israel, but also on its closest allies. This is a direct consequence of Western countries' acquiescence, who for months knowingly and methodically pumped up anti-Iran hysteria in the UN Security Council and in the Board of Governors of IAEA. The states didn't even try to come up with a constructive solution to the crisis surrounding the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action and the Security Council Resolution 2231, which endorsed it. Their goal was completely different. It was to put pressure on Iran in any way possible, to paint Iran as the source of all the trouble in the region, and to baselessly present the reciprocal legitimate steps by Tehran when they try to trigger the protection mechanisms in JCPOA as violating the obligations under non-proliferation. The Iranians took this for years and did not reject interacting with IAEA, nor did move away from a dialogue so as to find negotiated solutions. I would like to recall here, and this is of principal importance now, that all of the issues having to do with JCPOA began when the United States unilaterally left the nuclear deal in 2018. And also because of the principled unwillingness by the UK, France, and Germany to comply with the obligations they have under JCPOA, including to create the conditions for Tehran to receive the material yield from the lifting of unilateral sanctions by the EU in force until 2015. And later, they even went so far as to resume unilateral sanctions, which runs counter to Article 25 of the Charter. The European Union also joined in with this pressure, disregarding thus their duty of impartial coordinator of the joint JCPOA Commission. The most egregious example was what happened in Vienna yesterday. Yet another biased and divorced from reality resolution passed by the Board of Governors of IAEA, which talks about some trumped-up threat to international peace and security from the Iran nuclear program. And this happened despite the fact that Iran is strictly complying with its obligations under NPT and under the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreements, and despite the fact that Iran remains the most inspected IAEA states. And the reports of IAEA Secretariat state clearly that there is no non-proliferation risk. In other words, the Western participants to the JCPOA have been doing everything to fuel the escalation and essentially incited it. They artificially created tension at international platforms, and this only provided Israel with additional impetus for radical steps and created the feeling of impunity with Israel. In the context of the current strikes by Israel, what we noticed is the information mass media about the fact that there was likely coordination between Israel and British special services. Immediately after the Israeli strikes, they sheltered the Israeli aviation which participated in the strikes in their bases in Cyprus. We also noticed a statement made by Israel when they said that they warned about their attacks. They warned Germany, JCPOA participant, and Italy. It also came to the fore that our American colleagues also had information about the strikes. The Israeli strikes were also supported by the French, who clearly knew about them beforehand. And we will not be surprised here if the members of this group of like-minded states will start condemning Iran for their actions, which they undertook fully in line with Article 51 of the Charter. We are following very closely the current situation with the IAEA Secretariat. The life and health of its personnel has been threatened by the Israeli military adventure, and we expect that the Director General of the agency is going to provide us with objective assessment and analysis of developing situation, including from the viewpoint of radiological consequences. Madam President, the unprovoked attacks against the territory of sovereign Iran, the targeted strikes on the peaceful nuclear facilities cannot be justified in any way. The international community cannot and should not stand idly by when such a provocation presents itself. And tolerating such actions is a sure way to large-scale war and a serious threat to global security. We're convinced that the Security Council has to provide an unequivocal legal and political assessment of what's been done by Israel, and also call for an immediate halt to any kind of pressure by force and for a rejection of practice of unilateral military steps. We need to support any and all diplomatic efforts aimed at de-escalation and the return to negotiations. Let me underscore yet once again that settling issues having to do with the Iranian nuclear program is only possible if a peaceful political and diplomatic pathway is followed. No forceful resolution can be either legitimate nor viable here. By the way, let me say that the United States themselves have stated this repeatedly when they explained their readiness to continue with negotiations. Russia remains committed to strengthening international law, abiding by the UN Charter, and finding solutions which exclude further sliding of the region towards a new destructive war. And we are ready to work with all those who will advocate diplomacy and who will be looking for peaceful means to resolve differences. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, I wish to extend my appreciation to you for your prompt response in convening this urgent meeting, which underscores the gravity of the situation before us. I thank USG Di Carlo and Director General Grossi for their insightful briefing. From the outset of the mandate of Algeria on this Council, we have consistently warned against the growing danger of a broad regional conflagration, fueled by a spiral of illegal acts and multiple provocation of Israel. The events of today sadly confirm the validity of those warnings. We are now faced again with the serious and deliberate act of aggression. The Israeli army have launched coordinated strikes on the territory of Iran, targeting both military and civilian infrastructure. These actions are not only unprovoked and unjustifiable, they constitute a flagrant violation of international law, a violation of the Charter of the United Nations. As clearly articulated in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the Charter, all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat of or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner and consistent with the purposes of the United Nations. The logic of unilateral force, of so-called preemptive strikes, outside any legal mandate, cannot be normalized and cannot be tolerated within this Council. Once again, these attacks prove that the only thing that preemptive action could prevent is peace. So the justifications presented by Israeli officials are unacceptable. They are flawed, especially since they come from a UN member that continues to operate outside the framework of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, that is not fully under the IAEA nuclear safeguards regime, and which has persistently refused to join the negotiation process related to the establishment of a zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. In its communiqué published this morning, the IAEA recalls the numerous General Conference resolutions on the topic of military attacks against nuclear facilities, providing that any armed attacks, I quote, any armed attack or and a threat against nuclear facility devoted to peaceful purposes constitutes a violation of the principle of the United Nations Charter, a violation of the international law and the status of the agency. Furthermore, the IAEA has consistently underlined that armed attacks on nuclear facilities could result on radioactive releases with grave consequences within and beyond the boundaries of the state which has been attacked. Colleagues, let us overlook the timing. Let us not overlook the timing. These attacks occurred precisely as Iran and the United States, with the facilitation of Oman, are engaged in indirect negotiation regarding Iran's nuclear program. A sixth round of discussion was due to take place this weekend in Muscat. The question must be asked about these attacks. Why now? Madam President, the use of force without Security Council authorization, absent a legitimate claim of self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, undermines the very foundation of the international legal order that this body, the Security Council, was created to uphold. It is an act completely divorced from any legal ground, but does not come to the surprise of anyone in this chamber. Yes, the Israeli acts like if international law does not exist, or simply it does not apply to them. Israel is sowing chaos throughout the region, throughout the Middle East. Its conduct is unworthy of a member of the United Nations. We are witnessing a repeated act of aggression, the bombing of the Lebanese capital, the occupation of new territories in Syria, in Lebanon, in Palestine, and repeated violation of Syrian sovereignty, including abduction of civilians, as occurred just yesterday. In Gaza, Israel is using starvation as a method of warfare, in clear violation of international humanitarian law. A genocide is unfolding before our eyes, before your eyes. This is the behavior of a rogue state, and yet some still wonder why the Middle East remains so dangerously unstable. Madam President, the international community cannot allow a precedent to take hold whereby Israel acts as a judge and a jury, launching unilateral attacks in violation of established legal norms. Such course of action would erode the credibility of the Security Council and diminish the authority of the United Nations Charter itself. We must reaffirm clearly and collectively that the principles enshrined in the Charter are not optional. They are binding obligations. The prohibition of the use of force and the respect of sovereignty of member states are the pillars upon which our international system is built. We further reiterate that right must prevail over might. No political objective, no matter of strategic, can justify actions that defy the legal order upon which peace among nations depends. Let us be clear. Upholding international law is not a choice. It is a duty under all circumstances and without exception. Without exception. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening this important and urgent meeting. I also thank Director General Grossi and USG DiCarlo for their significant briefings regarding Israel's ongoing attacks and their impact. The Republic of Korea is gravely concerned about the escalating and deepening conflict in the Middle East. We condemn all actions that plunge the region into an extremely dangerous situation. We are deeply alarmed by Israel's announcement that its targeted operation will continue for as many days as it takes to eliminate the Iranian threat. Although it appears that the strikes were directed at military sites and personnel, including nuclear facilities and missile factories, it is highly troubling that reports indicate they have already resulted in many civilian casualties. As Director General Grossi pointed out, attacks on nuclear facilities could also result in radioactive releases with potential grave consequences on the lives and safety of the people across the region. We support the IAEA's commitment to ensuring nuclear safety, security, and its safeguards mandate in all circumstances. Iran's retaliation risks further escalation in a region already scarred by years of violence and destruction. The Council has consistently warned against the spillover effects of such conflicts. A full-scale war would serve no one in the world. We therefore urge both parties to exercise maximum restraint and refrain from any actions that could lead to further escalation. Another cycle of violence and retaliation must be avoided. We believe both countries possess the wisdom to avert a broader conflict that the region can hardly afford, and that a narrow but vital window for diplomacy still remains to pull back from the brink of all-out conflagration. Madam President, as a country neighboring another that is seriously violating non-proliferation obligations, the Republic of Korea shares serious concerns over Iran's continued expansion of its nuclear program, including the accelerated production of highly enriched uranium. In light of the expiration of UN Resolution 2231 this October, we have consistently urged Iran to fully cooperate with the IAEA in its monitoring and verification activities. under the NPT Safeguards Agreement. However, yesterday, the IAEA Board of Governors adopted a resolution declaring Iran's non-compliance with its non-proliferation obligations for the first time in 20 years. Under this backdrop, the current crisis underscores the urgent need to reach a robust agreement that ensures the exclusively peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program. Without such a resolution, a vicious cycle of armed attack and retaliation may persist, driving the region into even deeper turmoil and instability. We once again call for immediate de-escalation and a renewed push toward a diplomatic solution. The Republic of Korea firmly opposes any steps that further inflame tensions in the region. Pursuing a military solution may produce short-term visible effect, but in the mid to long term, they will only further deepen and entrench the instability and insecurity in the Middle East. We urge all parties to exercise the utmost restraint and urgently return to diplomacy. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, allow me to express my gratitude for swiftly convening this important meeting today. I also would like to thank USG DiCarlo and Director Gross for their comprehensive briefing on the grave developments unfolding in the Middle East. Madam President, Somalia is gravely concerned by the escalating confrontation between the Islamic Republic of Iran and Israel, especially in the light of recent reports regarding Israeli airstrikes on Iran and Iran's subsequent actions. These developments represent a dangerous turning point with serious implications not only for the two countries involved, but for the entire region and the world. We are gravely concerned by the airstrikes against Iran and call for full respect of its sovereignty, territorial integrity, in accordance with the UN Charter and international law. The use of force against a sovereign nation, regardless of the justification, risks undermining the foundational principles of international law and further destabilizing global peace and security. While we recognize the right to self-defense enshrined in Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, we call for restraint and de-escalation of the situation. The spillover effects are no longer hypothetical, and their consequences are already painfully clear, threatening to deepen existing crises and endanger countless lives in the Middle East. Madam President, at this critical juncture, my delegation calls for diplomacy, restraint,
of the global non-proliferation regime, and we underscore the irreplaceable role that is played by the International Atomic Energy that the full respect Our position is based on the fundamental principles of our foreign policy: respect for and strengthening of the multilateral system, the non-proliferation regime, and the promotion of diplomatic dialogue as an essential tool to ease tensions and reduce strategic risks. We take note of the report of the IAEA Director General, reference number GOV/2025/24, recently circulated to the members of this Council, where it's indicated that the agency's verification and monitoring related to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, have been severely affected by Iran's cessation of its compliance with commitments, nuclear commitments. Furthermore, we are closely following the discussions of the IAEA Board of Governors, in which a resolution was adopted yesterday, the 12th of June, in Vienna, a resolution stating that the Islamic Republic of Iran is in breach of its obligations under its safeguards agreement with the agency. Unfortunately, the information available to now with regard to the facts and motivations does not still allow us to know the practical scope of this non-compliance and the derived effects from this, and also does not allow us to distill conclusions from this information. Therefore, for the moment, in any event, neither the parties nor the United Nations should allow these events to drag the region into a broader conflict which would contravene the principles of the United Nations Charter and international law. We must act with the utmost urgency and responsibility to prevent this. Panama urgently calls for maximum restraint from all states, respect for international law and for the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter, and for refraining from any action that could escalate tensions. We urgently appeal for the revitalization of diplomatic channels as a path to reduce tensions and mitigate risks that could have irreparable consequences for international security. We also would recall that international law requires the protection of civilian infrastructure, with special emphasis on nuclear facilities intended for peaceful purposes. Civilian assets that must be protected from attacks and reprisals due to their very nature and because of the potential risks that they pose to the environment and civilian populations. There is no military shortcut to stability. Only genuine, inclusive and sustained dialogue can offer a lasting way out of the crises that bring us here today. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Panama for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank you for convening this emergency meeting of the Security Council. At the outset, Sierra Leone unequivocally deplores the unlawful use of force in contravention of the Charter of the United Nations. We deeply regret the seeming reversion to a period when a state can unilaterally resort to the use of force against another state in clear breach of the Charter and international law without consequence. For small states, this is deeply troubling, a deeply troubling trend which poses grave risk to international peace and security and must be firmly rejected. Turning to our agenda, I thank Under-Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo and Director General Rafael Grossi for their important briefing. We express grave alarm over the recent report of military strikes by the State of Israel against the territory of the Islamic Republic of Iran, including strikes on or near sensitive nuclear facilities, including the main Natanz nuclear facility. We are deeply troubled by the loss of life, as according to report, the strikes killed senior Iranian officials, nuclear scientists, and civilians. This development represents a dangerous escalation at a time when the Middle East is already facing multiple and overlapping crises. The region, in our view, is at a precipice, and this moment calls for restraint, responsibility, and diplomacy. We note with deep concern the letter dated 13 June 2025 from the Permanent Representative of Iran, issued as document S/2025/379, which brings to the attention of the Council very serious report of violations of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Iran. Any such use of force, especially across international borders, raises significant concerns under international law, including the Charter of the United Nations, which prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. We are further troubled by the potential implications of military operations affecting nuclear facilities. As Director General Grossi of IAEA has previously cautioned, any military action targeting or threatening nuclear facilities poses severe risk to human lives, the environment, and regional security. Attacks on nuclear installations could have catastrophic consequences far beyond the region. Sierra Leone fully aligns with the call by the UN Secretary General for de-escalation, dialogue, and the exercise of maximum restraint. This is a time for diplomacy, not confrontation. We urge all parties to step back from the edge and to recommit to diplomatic channels as the only viable path towards durable peace and stability. Madam President, the Middle East has long been plagued by cycles of conflict and mistrust. But history has also shown that bold diplomacy, even in the most difficult moment, can yield hope. We therefore call for an immediate cessation of hostile actions and urge the revival of regional and international efforts aimed at de-escalation and mutual security assurances. In this regard, Sierra Leone reiterates its long-standing position that the only path to lasting peace in the region lies in good faith negotiation based on international law and the principles of the UN Charter. We reaffirm the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states in the region and underscore the need to avoid provocations and retaliatory measures that may trigger wider regional conflagration. We also express our support for the important work of the IAEA in monitoring nuclear programs and ensuring peaceful use of nuclear energy. The independence and impartiality of the agency must be respected by all member states. In this critical time, full cooperation with the IAEA is essential to prevent further erosion of trust and to safeguard against nuclear proliferation. The international community cannot afford to allow further escalation. The cost in human life, environmental degradation, economic disruption, and regional instability will be incalculable. This is a moment of truth for this Council to assert its collective responsibility in upholding peace and security. Therefore, we call on global leaders and states with influence to emphasize the need for non-military approaches at this time and to promote dialogue, particularly through the IAEA, as the international technical institution entrusted with overseeing the peaceful use of nuclear energy. We reaffirm the Security Council's responsibility to promote de-escalation and preserve international peace and security through peaceful and lawful means. We call on all members of the Council to work constructively towards a consensus response that reaffirms our shared commitment to the principles of the UN Charter, especially the peaceful resolution of dispute. In closing, Madam President, Sierra Leone urges all concerned parties to take a step back, to de-escalate, and to return to the table of dialogue. The world is watching, and history will judge the choices to be made in this defining moment. Finally, on the broader question of peace in the Middle East, Sierra Leone expresses its regret over the announcement of the postponement of the planned high-level conference on Palestine and the two-state solution as a result of the recent strikes. We hope that the conference will be reconvened at the earliest opportunity and as a crucial step towards advancing a just and lasting peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of China.
President, thank you for convening this emergency open meeting and for the briefings by Director General Grossi and Under Secretary General Di Carlo. Early this morning, Israel launched large-scale attacks on multiple targets in Iran, causing damage to Iran's nuclear facilities and casualties. The Israeli side said that the Israeli military operations would last for several days. China condemns Israel's actions that violate Iran's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity, opposes the intensification of tensions and expansion of conflicts, and is deeply concerned about the potential grave consequences of the Israeli operations. The abrupt heating up of the region serves no one's interests. We urge Israel to immediately cease all military adventurism, avoid further escalating tensions, and call on all relevant parties to abide by the UN Charter and international law, resolve disputes through political and diplomatic means, and jointly maintain regional peace and stability. China is seriously concerned about the negative impact of the current developments on the diplomatic negotiations on the Iranian nuclear issue. China has always been committed to peacefully resolving the Iranian nuclear issue through dialogue and negotiation. We oppose the use of force and illegal unilateral sanctions and oppose armed attacks on peaceful nuclear facilities. As an NPT signatory, Iran's right to the peaceful uses of nuclear energy should be fully respected. President, for some time now, conflicts in the Middle East have dragged on, and the regional situation has remained highly tense. Gaza has been subjected to prolonged attacks and blockades, with over 2 million people trapped in an unprecedented humanitarian disaster. The international community should work together to promote a ceasefire in Gaza, de-escalate the regional situation, and effectively curb the spread of the conflict. Countries with significant influence over Israel should practically play a constructive role. The Security Council should make full use of all the means conferred to it by the Charter to ensure the implementation of its relevant resolutions and to play its due role in maintaining regional peace and security. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Madam President. And let me also thank Under Secretary General Di Carlo and Director General Grossi for your briefings. Colleagues, we meet at a critical moment for regional and international peace and security. As we speak, the situation in the Middle East is once again at the top of our agenda. The risk of escalation and regional destabilization is deeply worrying and something that requires our greatest attention. It is now time for all actors to show utmost restraint, to prioritize the safety and well-being of their people, to choose dialogue over confrontation. Madam President, Denmark's position is clear. Iran must never be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon. For years, Iran has continued to undertake activities in blatant violation of the JCPOA. Its production and accumulation of highly enriched uranium had reached unprecedented levels. Its nuclear enrichment capability and its operations continue to expand. It is very disturbing that the IAEA is unable to provide assurances that the Iranian nuclear program is exclusively peaceful because Iran is not fulfilling its legally binding safeguards obligations. These activities constitute a threat to international peace and security and a threat to the global non-proliferation regime. Yesterday's IAEA resolution clearly demonstrated this dangerous course of action. Still, we strongly believe that diplomacy must prevail. We have supported the talks between Iran and the United States on the status of Iran's nuclear program. We strongly urge Iran to engage in this dialogue in good faith. Madam President, in this current climate, we stress the importance of avoiding serious consequences in terms of a nuclear accident, which would be nothing short of devastating. This is not true only for Iran, but far beyond its borders. We urge all parties to abide by their obligations under the UN Charter and international law, including avoiding any steps that could lead to a potential radioactive release. Let me also use this occasion to express our full support for the IAEA and its verification and monitoring of Iran's nuclear program, and its reporting. The involvement of the IAEA remains essential. Madam President, in closing, let me reiterate the urgency of de-escalation at this moment. For a region already grappling with too much crisis and conflict, a cycle of retaliation would only worsen the situation and risk plunging the Middle East further into conflict. This must be avoided. We call for a recommitment to diplomacy over discord, for the courage to reduce tensions, to step back from this dangerous brink. Denmark stands ready to support any and all efforts to this end, to find a lasting solution to the Iranian nuclear issue through a negotiated political solution. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank Under-Secretary General Di Carlo and Director General Grossi for the informative and timely briefings. Madam President, the situation in Iran and the Middle East is still unfolding. There is a dangerous moment, and any further military escalation in the Middle East and beyond should be avoided. We are particularly concerned at the escalation in the region while talks between Iran and the United States on Iran's nuclear program were underway. Allow me to make 2 brief points. First, we call on both sides to immediately de-escalate, show maximum restraint, and avoid retaliation. The international community must be immediately engaged to prevent a regional conflagration using all available diplomatic and dialogue channels. We are closely monitoring the situation and reiterate our strong commitment to regional security. Greece has repeatedly expressed its strong concern over the Iranian nuclear program and stressed that Iran must never be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon. In this context, we reaffirm Israel's right to protect itself and to assure its security. At the same time, we strongly believe that lasting security can only be achieved through diplomacy and in a negotiated deal. A diplomatic resolution of the crisis is now urgent for the sake of the region's stability and global security. We stand ready to support, both bilaterally and through international organizations, all diplomatic efforts and prioritize a return to talks on Iran's nuclear program held by the United States. Second, we reiterate the need to respect international law and international humanitarian law. It is essential to uphold the UN Charter as regards the use of force, as well as the integrity of the global non-proliferation regime. We recall the obligation of UN member states to act in accordance with the UN Charter and international law. It is also of the utmost importance to ensure that civilians do not find themselves in the crossfire, especially given the nuclear aspect of the evolving crisis. As our foreign minister has recently stated in this chamber, and I quote, "The protection of civilians is not optional. It is a legal obligation under international humanitarian law and a moral imperative we cannot afford to neglect." We call upon all parties to respect international humanitarian law in all circumstances, and we call upon all member states to use their influence to ensure all parties respect for it, unquote. Madam President, in closing, let me repeat in the strongest possible terms that now more than ever, a diplomatic resolution is the only option. It is our only hope for peace and security in the region and beyond. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President. We would like to also join colleagues in thanking Director General Grossi and Under Secretary General Di Carlo for their briefings. Madam President, Pakistan strongly condemns unjustified and illegitimate aggression by Israel against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Pakistan stands in resolute solidarity with the brotherly people of Iran. We offer our sympathies and condolences on the loss of life and damages due to these heinous attacks. The Israeli military strikes violate the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Iran and clearly contravene the UN Charter and fundamental principles of international law. We unequivocally denounce these blatant provocations, which constitute a grave danger and a serious threat to the peace, security, and stability of the entire region and beyond, with serious implications. Iran has the right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Madam President, these attacks follow a dangerous pattern of Israeli irresponsible conduct marked by ongoing military operations in Gaza and repeated cross-border strikes in Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, demonstrating a consistent and deliberate disregard for international norms. Israel's actions in the Middle East reflect a continuing pattern of unilateral militarism in flagrant violation of Article 2.4 of the UN Charter and represent acts of aggression as defined under General Assembly Resolution 3314 of 1974. Israel's serial breaches of sovereignty normalize impunity, erode the authority of the United Nations, and gravely undermine the international order. Such blatant aggression and contempt for international law has already had devastating consequences. In Gaza, tens of thousands of civilians have been killed as a result of Israeli military onslaught, and a humanitarian catastrophe has unfolded under an illegal blockade that has in fact been there for over 15 years. In Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon, Israeli airstrikes have repeatedly targeted sovereign territory, undermining regional stability and exacerbating tensions. The fact that these attacks against Iran have happened in the middle of a negotiations process aimed at finding a peaceful diplomatic solution to the Iranian nuclear issue makes it all the more morally repugnant and against international norms. These actions risk eroding the trust and sanctity of the negotiations process, so crucial for the peaceful settlement of these issues. Madam President, Pakistan reaffirms its support for the resolution of the Iranian nuclear issue through peaceful means, diplomatic engagement, and sustained dialogue. The JCPOA was an outcome of painstaking and arduous yet constructive negotiations. It charted a roadmap to comprehensively address the concerns of the parties involved by clearly defining their relevant obligations and responsibilities. The illegal use of force against Iran and the ensuing situation are likely to frustrate the ongoing diplomatic efforts and could destabilize a region that is already under very severe stress. The ongoing diplomatic contacts to reach a negotiated deal and other endeavors to promote regional peace and security must not be allowed to be appended. It is highly regrettable that these attacks have happened when the IAEA was continuing its verification activities in Iran. Such actions threaten the IAEA's technical work, which should be supported and not disrupted. Israel has violated international law, IAEA statute, and several IAEA resolutions by attacking the IAEA safeguarded facilities. In addition to serious violation of international law, these attacks risk setting a dangerous negative precedent and pose a grave threat to safety of populations in the region and around the globe. Pakistan, as an immediate neighbor of Iran, is therefore seriously concerned. Security Council Resolution 487 strongly affirmed such attacks as a clear violation of the UN Charter, the norms of international conduct, and a serious threat to the entire IAEA safeguard regime. We call on all parties, Madam President, to fulfill their respective obligations and responsibilities and avoid escalation. Even in these testing times, diplomatic engagement and dialogue must be prioritized. Clearly, the international community is in favor of peace and stability in the region. In a few days, next week, the international community, the UN membership, was to come together to express its will to chart the path for the Palestinian state as part of the two-state solution that would usher in the long-awaited, just, and durable peace in the Middle East. Israel's reckless and irresponsible behavior cannot be allowed to jeopardize the efforts for peace, endanger the stability of the entire region, and risk wider escalation, thereby threatening global peace and security. The Security Council bears primary responsibility to maintain international peace and security and to stop this aggression immediately. It must hold the aggressor accountable for its actions. This Council must deny Israel the free hand and the impunity with which it continues to operate in defiance of international law and international opinion. It is also our collective responsibility to reject any notions by anyone, anywhere, that seek to distort, misuse, and abuse the right of self-defense in violation of international law and the UN Charter. Finally, this Council must collectively muster the courage to take positions and adopt decisions that are in full conformity with the Charter of the United Nations. In accordance with its responsibility, the Council should encourage, support, and prioritize dialogue and diplomacy to advance peaceful resolution of conflicts. That is the only viable path forward, as many around the table have also echoed in their comments. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And I'd like to start by thanking USG DiCarlo and Director General Grossi for their briefings. President, the Security Council meets today at a dangerous moment. We are deeply concerned by Israel's strikes on sites in Iran, as well as the Iranian military action we've already seen in response. There is a clear risk that this crisis escalates, with serious implications for peace and security across the region and beyond. This is in no one's interests. Colleagues, our first priority must be to prevent further escalation in the Middle East. We urge all parties to urgently step back, show restraint, and reduce tensions. The UK did not participate in this action. And let me say clearly and unequivocally that Russia's claim that British sovereign bases on the island of Cyprus were in any way involved is nonsense. It is deeply irresponsible at moments like this for Russia to be spreading disinformation. We firmly support any diplomatic efforts to return to stability. Today, we have spoken to Israel at the highest levels, and our Foreign Secretary has also spoken to Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi. We have urged both sides to show restraint and de-escalate tensions. We continue to engage partners across the region to ensure we are collectively doing our utmost to push for a peaceful outcome. The UK, in partnership with the E3, has always championed a diplomatic solution to address Iran's nuclear escalation, which has no credible civilian justification. We will not be deterred from this. As my Prime Minister said today, we have long held concerns about Iran's nuclear program, as documented by the IAEA. Israel also needs to protect its people and security. It is therefore in the interests of all actors to stop military confrontation and pursue a negotiated solution. President, this is time for a strong, united position from members of this Council. We must take urgent action to de-escalate and provide an opportunity for a return to diplomacy. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me begin by thanking USG DiCarlo and Director General Grossi for their valuable contributions to today's discussion. Madam President, Slovenia is deeply concerned with the overnight and today's developments that threaten to destabilize an already very fragile state of affairs in the Middle East. We express our deepest concern with the Israeli strikes on Iran and Iran's response. We condemn any military escalation in the region. Madam President, Israeli attacks on nuclear installations in Iran come at a particularly volatile time. While talks between Iran and the United States on the status of Iran's nuclear program are underway. As both my President and the Prime Minister have said, these negotiations have sparkled a glimmer of hope to reach a deal that would be of substantial importance not only for the region, but for the whole international community. Slovenia remains concerned with the size and unclear nature of Iran's nuclear program. We have zero tolerance for proliferation of nuclear weapons. Moreover, our concerns are deeper by the fact that the IAEA still cannot confirm the exclusively peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program. However, for us, strikes against civilian infrastructure, whether they happen in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, or anywhere else, are unacceptable. Time and time again, Slovenia has cautioned against military action on Iran's nuclear program. There is only one legitimate option, and Slovenia remains confident that there is only a political solution to the issue. With this in mind, Slovenia calls on Iran and the US to prioritize a peaceful solution and continue their talks in Muscat. Madam President, lasting and robust security is built upon diplomacy, not military action. I join the Secretary General's call on both sides to show maximum restraint. Watching footage from the ground, it is clear the time to de-escalate is now, immediately. A descent into deeper conflict must be avoided at all costs. The region, and indeed the world, cannot afford it. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for her briefing, and I give the floor now to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo and Director General Rafael Grossi, for your briefing. Yesterday, Israel took unilateral action against Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran's regime has, since its founding, repeatedly called for the State of Israel's eradication, launched unprovoked, direct, and proxy attacks on Israeli civilians, and spread terror, instability, and untold human suffering throughout the region. As we speak, Iran is firing missiles at civilian areas across Israel, including in Tel Aviv. As President Trump has repeatedly said, this dangerous regime cannot be allowed to have nuclear weapons. Israel advised us this action was necessary for its self-defense. Every sovereign nation has the right to defend itself, and Israel is no exception. The United States was informed of the strikes ahead of time, but was not militarily involved in these strikes. Our absolute foremost priority is the protection of U.S. citizens, personnel, and forces in the region. As Secretary Rubio said, Iran should not target U.S. interests or personnel. Let me be crystal clear. No government, proxy, or independent actor should target American citizens, American bases, or other American infrastructure in the region. The consequences for Iran would be dire. President Trump was elected with a sweeping mandate from the American people to advance peace and to avoid the grave mistakes of past administrations that led to forever wars. We seek a secure peace. As President Trump said, the violence should come to an end, and Iran should make a deal so that there is, quote, no more
injured. The overwhelming majority of them civilians, including women and children. Earlier today, Israel continued its act of aggression against Iran, once again targeting multiple civilian and military sites across several Iranian cities. These deliberate and systematic killings were not only illegal, but inhuman, a chilling display of calculated aggression. These atrocities constitute clear act of state terrorism and flagrant violation of international law. Madam President, the inaction of the United Nations, the Security Council, and the IAEA, despite repeated and documented warning by Islamic Republic of Iran regarding Israeli threats against its nuclear sites, have seriously undermined the credibility and authority. Their silence in the face of repeated Israeli provocation has emboldened this rogue regime to escalate its violation and cross every red line. Let us be clear. This reckless attack on safeguarded nuclear facilities defied not only the fundamental principles of international law, but also basic common conscience. Any damage to these facilities risks catastrophic radiological consequences that would not be confined to Iran, but could spread across the region and beyond. Only a regime devoid of humanity and responsibility would endanger millions of lives in pursuit of its destructive ambitions. These actions stand in direct violation of numerous legal instruments, including the IAEA Statute, the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the Geneva Convention, and multiple Security Council and IAEA General Conference resolutions, all of which prohibit attacks or threats against nuclear facilities under safeguards. Above all, this aggression is a grave breach of the United Nations Charter, particularly Article 2, Paragraph 4, which prohibit the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any member state. Israel also violated Iraq's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The Permanent Mission of Iraq today formally protested and condemned this violation of its territorial integrity in a letter to the Security Council and the Secretary General. Madam President, those who support this regime with the United States at the forefront must understand that they are complicit by aiding and enabling these crimes, they share full responsibility for the consequences. Supporting Israel today is supporting war crimes, crimes against humanity, and deliberate undermining of global peace and security. The Israeli regime's long-standing crimes against the oppressed Palestinian people, its repeated violation of the sovereignty of regional countries, and its possessions of undeclared weapons of mass destruction have made the Middle East a cauldron of chronic instability since its creation. It is long overdue for the international community to act. This regime must be disarmed of all weapon mass destructions, placed under international supervision, and held fully accountable. Madam President, this is not a regional issue. This is not merely an attack on one country. This is a direct assault on the international order, an attack on the Charter of the United Nations, the UN system, the global nuclear non-proliferation regime, as well as the authority of the IAEA. Israel's leadership including its criminal prime minister, has shamelessly and publicly claimed responsibility for these heinous acts. Israeli officials say that this aggression aims to wreak nuclear talks. This confession alone is enough to reveal the real motive behind the attack: to kill diplomacy, to sabotage negotiation, and to drag the region into wider conflict. This leaves no room for denial. Furthermore, the aggression was intentional, coordinated, and fully backed by a permanent member of this Council, the United States. The United States' complicity in this terrorist attack is beyond doubt. The officials of the United States have expressly and brazenly confessed their willful aid and assistance in the crimes and gross violations that Israeli regime committed as of last night, including the deliberate transfer of arms. We will not forget that our people lost their lives as a result of the Israeli attacks with American weapons. These actions amount to declaration of war. They are the latest in a long and well-documented pattern of lawless, destabilizing, and aggressive behavior by the Israeli regime, a regime that acts with impunity because it is shielded by powerful allies. This must end. Madam President, the Security Council must act now, firmly and decisively. In 1981, this very Council responded unanimously to the Israeli military attack on Iraqi Osirak nuclear reactor by adopting Resolution 487, which unequivocally condemned the aggression as a flagrant violation of the Charter of the United Nations and international law. The Council also called on this criminal regime to refrain from any such acts or threats in the future. Had the Council enforced that resolution and held Israel accountable at that time, this regime would not have been emboldened to continue this unlawful behavior with impunity. The current aggression is a direct consequence of decades of inaction and double standards. Madam President, the Islamic Republic of Iran reaffirms its inherent right to self-defense as enshrined in Article 51 of the UN Charter. Iran will respond decisively and proportionately to these acts of aggression at a time, in a place, and by means of its choosing. This is not a threat. This is the natural, legal, and necessary consequence of an unprovoked military attack. Iran's response will be firm, lawful, and essential to restore deterrence, defend our sovereignty, and uphold the principles of international law. No aggressor can be allowed to act with impunity. Madam President, we have requested this emergency meeting because we expect this Council to fulfill its Charter mandate. The Security Council must condemn, in the strongest possible term, Israeli unlawful aggression. It must take immediate, concrete measures to hold the Israeli regime accountable and to prevent the further corrosion of international peace and security. Anything less would signal to collapse of the international system and invite chaos. Let me conclude with a simple and undeniable truth. Israel attacked Iran. Israel violated international law and the UN Charter, and Israel must be held accountable. The Security Council must act now and stop this act of aggression immediately. Silence is complicity in this crime. I thank you.
Thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Madam President, first I would like to thank USG DiCarlo and Director General Grossi. Madam President, Israel has acted to prevent its destruction, and the world now stands at a crossroad between denial and clarity. This is not only a defining moment for Israel, it is a defining moment for the global security order. and for the credibility of the international system. As we speak, hundreds of ballistic missiles with conventional payloads are striking Israel's cities, neighborhoods, communities. They are striking population centers, not military bases, not Air Force bases, cities. Dozens are injured, 2 of them in a critical condition, and we are still following the news. Now take a moment and imagine if today that radical regime had nuclear warheads for those missiles. Last night, the State of Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a preemptive military operation carried out with precision, purpose, and the most advanced intelligence at our disposal. The mission was very clear: dismantle Iran's nuclear program, eliminate the architects of its terror and aggression, and neutralize the regime's ability to follow through on its repeated public promise to destroy the State of Israel. For years, Iran has declared its intent. Its leaders have spoken without hesitation. Less than a month ago, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei called a, quote, cancerous tumor that must be eradicated. IRGC commanders have vowed to, quote, open the gates of hell on Israel. This is a picture from the main square in Tehran. The streets of Tehran display a countdown clock. At the time of the photo, you can see it in Arabic, it was at 8,411 days. It is tracking the regime's planned timeline for Israel's destruction, paid by the government, putting it in the main squares in Tehran. These threats have been made on a near-daily basis. Never again will we dismiss such threats. For too long, the world convinced itself that these were just words, that genocidal slogans and threats to erase us could be ignored or rationalized. But Israel has never had that luxury. We know our enemies. We know their ideology. And when a regime builds ballistic missiles, enriches uranium to near weapons grade, and openly declares its intent to destroy us, we believe them. We take them at their word. And we take action before it is too late. Colleagues, Israel did not act recklessly. We waited. We waited while Iran enriched uranium to 60%, a level with no civilian justification, and a level that brings the regime within days of a nuclear breakout. We waited while the IAEA reported that Iran had obstructed inspectors, destroyed monitoring equipment, and accelerated its covert special development program. We waited while Iran developed trigger mechanisms, detonation systems, and plans for warheads. We waited while its leadership actively recruited more nuclear scientists. We waited while Iran constructed a ballistic missile industry so large and sophisticated, and we can expose it now, that it was intended to challenge even the US and Russia in ballistic missile capabilities. They cannot deny it. We waited for diplomacy to work. We gave the international community time we watched negotiations stretched on as Iran made forced concessions or refused the most fundamental conditions. All the while, Iran continued to build toward the unthinkable. Last night, the wait ended. Our operation targeted 3 layers of the threat. First, we eliminated the central figures of Iran's military and nuclear command. This included Mohammad Hossein Bagheri, chief of the armed forces, Hossein Salami, commander of the IRGC terror organization, and Ghulam Ali Rashid, commander of emergency command. These men directed Iran's conventional military forces and terror forces. They coordinated the terror network that has plagued our region for decades. Think how many meetings you had here about the proxies of Iran in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Gaza. Second, we struck Iran's military infrastructure, specifically the surface-to-surface missile array. Israeli Air Force fighter jets, guided by precise intelligence, completed a series of strikes against the Iranian regime's missile capabilities. Dozens of launchers, missile storage facilities, and additional military sites were destroyed. Late last year, Iran launched wave after wave of ballistic missiles at our cities. They deliberately targeted civilians. The destruction of these missile systems is a moral imperative. These are weapons with the capacity to reach thousands of kilometers. Leaving them in the hands of a radical regime, one that openly dreamed of wiping our nation off the map, was not an option. We will not hesitate. We will not relent. And we will not allow a genocidal regime to endanger our people. Third, we struck the core of the nuclear program, the underground enrichment facilities at Natanz. This facility was operating at a military-grade capacity. Intelligence confirmed that within days, Iran could have produced enough material for multiple bombs. We targeted the heart of that effort. Madam President, this operation was carried out because the alternative was unthinkable. How long did the world expect us to wait? How long? Let's speak about it. Until they assembled the bomb? Until they mounted it on a Shahab missile? Until it was en route to Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, like the more than 100 missiles that they sent an hour ago? How long should we wait? And if anyone in this chamber still believes Iran would never use such a weapon, I invite you to remember October 7. On that day, we saw what Iran's proxy Hamas was capable of. And then in Gaza, they did it with Kalashnikovs, with grenades. They butchered families, they burned children alive, they mutilated women. Imagine what the head of the snake would do with a nuclear warhead. To that end, we uncovered intelligence revealing a multi-front plan directed by Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas for a future assault on Israel. This one would be far more sophisticated than October 7. It envisioned mass missile launches, first from Iran, then from Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, followed by coordinated infiltrations of our borders. The plan was not aspirational. It was operational, and it was nearing execution. This Council has convened countless times in recent months. You have passed resolutions, called for restraint, demanded ceasefire. You met in emergency sessions when Hamas was under threat. But when Iran marched toward nuclear capability, you said nothing. When they crossed line after line, you drew none of your own. So we acted. We acted to ensure our people alive. We acted so that Jewish children in Jerusalem will not wake up to the sound of air raid sirens triggered by a nuclear launch. We acted so that Iranian missiles will not carry radioactive payloads into civilian neighborhoods. We acted because history has taught us that silence is complicity and hesitation is fatal. We acted because 80 years ago, the Jewish people made a promise to ourselves, never again. That promise applies to a nuclear holocaust as well. This was an act of national preservation. It was one we undertook alone, not because we wanted to, but because we were left no other option. We now turn to this Council, not for permission, but for recognition. Recognition that Israel did what the world should have done. Recognition that the Iranian regime violated every obligation they ever undertook. Recognition that Israel had the undeniable right and duty to defend its people from extermination. We urge the Council to condemn Iran's nuclear violations. We urge the Council to finally acknowledge the existential threat Iran poses to the world. We urge the Council to join us in our commitment to prevent their genocidal dreams from becoming a reality. But we also expect something even more basic: moral clarity. Stop equating aggressors with defenders. Stop treating a genocidal regime and a democracy under siege as two sides of the same coin. The Iranian regime was preparing for war. This war would have stretched across the Middle East, to Europe, to Asia, to the Americas. It would have been against the international order. We acted to prevent a threat that would endanger not only Israel, but the entire world. We will not sit quietly while our people are targeted. Not again, not ever. Empty words will not stop Iran. Israel will. We did not wait for the bomb to fall, and we will never allow that day to come. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Israel for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Iraq.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for responding وأشكر السيد وكيل الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة والسيد مدير عام USG and the Director General of the IEA for their briefings. السيدة الرئيس Madam President, Iraq expresses its deep concern and condemnation of the dangerous military aggression committed by the Israeli entity against the territories of the Islamic Republic of Iran, including their blatant violation of Iraq's sovereignty and the inviolability of its airspace. This constitutes a flagrant breach of the provisions of international law and the UN Charter. In this regard, the Republic of Iraq has submitted a formal letter of complaint to Your Excellency, President of the Security Council. We clarified the details of the said violations, which is not only an infringement on the inviolability and sovereignty of Iraq, but is also an illegitimate use and transgression on the airspace of another sovereign state to initiate acts of aggression against another UN member state. This exposes the entire region to huge security risks. This unacceptable and illegal aerial breach jeopardizes Iraq's security and stability. It's also a dangerous violation of our territorial integrity and our airspace. It pushes us into conflicts that we are not party to and are far from.
It threatens regional and international peace and security. Iraq categorically rejects any attempt at turning our territories or airspace into a theater to settle regional or international accounts. We stress that we will not permit our national security or sovereignty to be at risk. We will not allow such violations to be repeated under any pretexts. Madam President, the government of the Republic of Iraq underlines that this aggression is also a violation of relevant Security Council resolutions and a violation of the sovereignty of a UN member state. This necessitates a clear position from the international community to ensure serious accountability. The Israeli entity is fully responsible for this escalation and for the repercussions of this violation of the security of Iraq and that of the entire region. Accordingly, the government of Iraq calls on the Council to first condemn this flagrant violation of Iraqi sovereignty and, considering it a clear breach of the principles of the UN Charter and the rules of international law. Second, hold the Israeli entity fully responsible legally and politically for these acts of aggression. Third, take the necessary measures to stop these violations and prevent their repetition as they put Iraq's security and stability at risk. Madam President, this aggression highlights once again the need for the Security Council to shoulder its responsibility and maintain international peace and security. It must take a clear position vis-à-vis such repeated violations by the Israeli entity, whether against the Palestinian people or against a neighboring country in the region, all with impunity in a way that threatens the credibility of the international law at large. It will only exacerbate tension and instability in the region, which might lead to grave consequences. In conclusion, Madam President, the Republic of Iraq reiterates that it is fully committed to the principles of good neighborliness, non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries, and respect of international law. We reserve our right to take any necessary measures to protect our national security and sovereignty in line with the Charter and the rules of international law. Iraq calls on this august Council to guarantee respect of state sovereignty and independence pursuant to the principles and purposes of the United Nations. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Iraq for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Kuwait.
In
the name of God, most compassionate, most merciful, thank you, Madam President. Distinguished members of the Council, at the outset, allow me to thank Madam Di Carlo and Mr. Grossi for their two valuable briefings. We address you today on behalf of the member states of the Gulf Cooperation Council, namely the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the State of Qatar, the Sultanate of Oman, and my country, the State of Kuwait. The GCC condemns the attacks by Israel since early this morning against the Islamic Republic of Iran and its attacks against Iranian territory. We express our concern towards this serious escalation that warns of serious and dire consequences for the regional security and stability. These acts of aggression that come at a delicate moment when the Middle East is witnessing increased level of tensions are a blatant violation against the sovereignty of a UN member state, and they represent a serious precedent that undermines the basis upon which the international law is built, and in particular the principle of the respect for state sovereignty and the non-use or threat of use of force against any state. Madam President, the timing of this attack is very sensitive when international efforts were intensifying to resume nuclear negotiations between Iran and the United States. This attack will likely derail the diplomatic efforts and risks a wider conflict that will seriously affect regional and international security. In this context, the GCC affirms that such attacks, regardless of the justification, will only lead to deeper polarization and an expanded conflict, and they pave the way for a regional trajectory that is dangerous and that will not serve the interests of any population in the region. We also emphasize that security in the region cannot be achieved through escalation and bombardment, but through dialogue and political and diplomatic means, and through promotion of good neighborliness and mutual respect.
وستواصل المجموعة الخليجية مساعيها الرامية لخفض التصعيد والدفع قدما بالحوار والدبلوماسية، وتجدد التزامها بالعمل مع الأطراف المعنية لإيجاد حلول سلمية ودائمة تضمن أمن واستقرار المنطقة. كما تدعو المجموعة في هذا الصدد إلى ممارسة أقصى درجات ضبط النفس والحكمة لتجنب المخاطر وتوزيع رقعة الصراع، وأن يتحمل المجتمع الدولي ومجلس الأمن على وجه الخصوص مسؤولياتهما في وقف هذه الانتهاكات. في الختام، تؤكد المجموعة الخليجية التزامها الثابت بدعم أمن واستقرار المنطقة ورفضها القاطع لأي انتهاك لسيادة الدول تحت أي ذريعة كانت، وتشدد على أهمية تجنب الانزلاق نحو مواجهات مفتوحة لا تخدم سوى قوى الفوضى والتطرف. شكرا سيد
Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Kuwait for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite Council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.